Fantastic. Thank you, John, and good afternoon, MTW expansion agencies. By this point, some of you guys are old hat. You've been MTW for over a year, I think, already. And for some of you, you are just now finishing up your onboarding webinar series. So welcome to you all. We now have 70 new MTW agencies, and we invited all of you here today for our office hours. We really want to hear from you, see if you have any questions. We have organized this in a way that we'll kind of ask you guys some questions just to kind of get the juices flowing a little bit, and then we will open it up and to hear from you guys as well. We've organized this around 4 specific topic areas, kind of first steps, which many of you are totally through by this point. We'll be talking about financial policies and procedures, financial reporting, and the MTW, the PHA plan. And again, what we are hoping to do today is we're going to be asking you guys some questions. We'll be using the Mentimeter. That's always a fun thing to do to get those juices flowing, and then we want to hear from you. And so with that, I think let's take it away. So first, let's remind ourselves, for those of us that aren't quite through this initial process yet, about the first steps. We are going to be using the Mentimeter. So ICF, if you could drop the Mentimeter information in, that would be wonderful. We have, again, a lot of agencies that are at different points in the process. And for those of you who are fairly well along, some of these might be easy. For some of you that are just starting off, they might be a little bit trickier. So let's see what we can do. Do we have the Mentimeter information? Okay, so if you go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and use, I can't see it because I don't have my glasses on, use the code 6342883. Again, 6342883. All right, let's get started. The first question: the public process should be a collaborative process with you and your community that begins after the selection and after the ACC amendment execution. So you can type your answer in the Mentimeter, you can type your answer in the chat, but either way, that's the answer is false. The public process needs to start early and often, and so hopefully that makes sense to everybody. That you want to kind of that public engagement with your staff, with your residents, with your stakeholders is key for a positive MTW program. Next question, number 2. It is important to involve the board early in the process, so they may ask questions, provide input before being asked to approve the MTW ACC amendment. True or false? It's important to ask the board early in the process so that they can ask questions or provide input before being asked to approve the MTW ACC amendment. So you put down your answers and put your answer in the chat. It looks like my computer might have frozen, but I'm still here. And the answer to that question is true. MTW is a significant undertaking. Agencies need to involve your boards early on in order to ensure these key stakeholders really understand what MTW means. Okay, are there any questions so far? Okay, next question. Number 3, once the MTW ACC amendment is submitted to HUD with the digital signature of the authorized PHA representative, it is considered fully executed. I was going to say this one's a little bit tricky, but based on the answers. So the answer to this is false. Again, just as a reminder, everybody, that MTW, you are not officially an MTW agency with MTW designation until HUD signs the MTW ACC amendment. So the agency signs it, submits it to HUD, and then the HUD General Deputy Assistant Secretary countersigns it. Once she signs it, when we send it back to you, at that point, you are now an MTW agency. Are there any questions on anything that we've talked about so far with the first steps? Any questions or comments relating to the public process and involving your residents and stakeholders? And again, feel free to use the chat or to come off mute. All right, so I had the easy part. Anything? Anybody? All right, y'all there? All right, let's move on to the next section. Oh, sorry, just kidding. So the key takeaways, well, there's one more slide here. Key takeaways from what we just talked about are that communication is essential. Early and often is essential. Plan for how you're going to engage your residents. So at this point, you all should have already engaged your residents a lot. And continue to engage them throughout. You want to hear their input, you want to get their buy-in. And again, as a reminder for those of you that have not yet submitted your MTW ACC amendment, so in the landlord incentives cohort, HUD needs a wet signature, so we need to see that signature on with a pen, right? Literally, to include the board resolution, submit it to the landlord incentives cohort mailbox. But you're not considered officially executed until Jenny sends it back with Dominique's signature on it. Any questions on that? Closing my program. I can't see you at all anymore, so if there's anything in the chat, I can't see it because my computer's trying to die. Okay, next slide.
And so there actually is a question in the chat, which you are not able to see. But if you'd like, we can read that to you. Or
thanks,
maybe
Janet, that would be great.
Yeah,
Janet,
or perhaps, excuse me, Anna, if you'd like to just come off mute and ask your question, that might be the easiest.
I was wondering, for the 45-day public process, we have to give 45 days notice before the public hearing. If we give the supplement to the board and then put it out for public hearing and then incorporate the comments, do we need another 45-day notice and another hearing before we can bring the final thing to the board, or is one sufficient?
I'm going to ask Allison Christensen if you could take that one.
Yeah, so once the, after the public process, you don't need to like restart the public process after you do it one time. So you should just put it out for the 45 days, make any changes that are reflective from your public process, and then that's the end of the process.
And then we can just take it to the board immediately after?
Correct. I believe, and I might have to kick it back to Marianne for this one. I don't know if there's that 15-day requirement between the hearing and the board acceptance for the PHA plan.
I need to pull up the, Jenny, while we're kind of move on to the next section, could I ask Allison, maybe if you or Jenny could take a look at a notice and we'll come back and answer it during the next question period?
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay, great. All right. So Anna, we will circle back on that last piece about at the next question, Mark. Other questions?
Marianne, there is another question, but it appears to me that it has to do with reporting on different programs, and so we might want to hold it for the reporting section. I'd let Philip make a call on that one if he'd like to handle it later, or if it seems appropriate for now.
Okay, that makes sense. let's hold the financial reporting questions till we, I think we are going to have a whole section on that.
Right. We do also have another question from Adam. Adam, would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Sure. So we, in April, we voted on our ACC amendment and HUD countersigned before the end of April. And we thought that it would be implemented, therefore, in May, that our new ACC amendment would be implemented in May. But we haven't seen a change in how the funding is being transmitted to us. In other words, we thought with unused vouchers, we would likely be receiving additional funding based on those unused Section 8 vouchers. How long should it take after the execution of our ACC amendment before the funding and resources are affected by the ACC amendment?
So I am going to, this is taking us right into that next slide, the next section relating to the, next slide, please, to funding policies. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of, again, ask some questions, specific questions relating to the financial policies and procedures. And then I think this may answer your question. Then if not, then Philip, I'll ask you to come back and answer this question, okay? Thanks, Adam. So I guess the first, so if we can pull up the Mentimeter again, mentimeter.com, same code 6342883. And the first question is using operating capital, MTW flexibility means what? Does it mean using operating capital and voucher funds for purposes that they were not originally appropriated for applying MTW administrative flexibilities, which is A? Does it mean B, PHAs can expend their voucher capital op funds for any purpose at all? Or C, does it mean they can complete the MTW ACC amendment execution process? Looks like this one was a gimme. So the correct answer is A. The funding flexibility refers to using your operating capital or voucher funding for other eligible voucher capital or public housing purposes, for the purposes that they were not necessarily appropriated for. And so this could include applying the MTW flexibilities, but when we talk about MTW funding flexibility, we mean using your operating funds, following the voucher rules, or using the HCV funds to follow the for operating purposes. That's the MTW flexibility, funding flexibility. Second question relates to when can an agency begin using their funds flexibly? Is it the day after signing the ACC amendment? Is it the first month following the MTW ACC amendment execution by HUD? Or is it C, the day the MTW supplement to the PHA plan is approved? And the answer is B, which is, you all got 100% correct. That's the first month following the execution of the MTW ACC amendment. Next question. Once the MTW supplement is approved, funding flexibility is allowable under all of the PHA's funding sources. True or false? Once it's approved, funding flexibility is allowable under all of PHA's sources. This one was a little bit tricky. The answer is false. There are some sources that you cannot use your funds flexibly. For example, if you receive funds through a Choice Neighborhoods funds, those were provided for a specific purpose. These cannot be, the funding cannot be used flexibly. mainstream funds, like special purpose funds. You need to follow the rules in the special purpose voucher FAQ. So that's an important one. Okay, one more question, two more questions. And this one, Adam, I think starts to get at what you were asking. Which renewal funding calculations change under MTW? Again, which renewal funding calculations change? Is it HCV HAP renewal calculation? Is it public housing renewal calculation? Or is it HCV housing administrative payments calculation? Wait a minute. Or, Philip, I might need, oh wait. Is it HCV admin? So is it HAP?
Marianne, I think we may have had a transposition issue that should say HCV. Yeah. I should say HCV admin fees.
Yeah. So it's A is the one that changes. Your HAP renewal is the one that changes. Public housing renewal is the same, and HCV admin fees is the same. HAP is the one that changes. Philip, anything else you want to say about that one?
Yeah, so, a couple of comments, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but, so really, most of the things in terms of how your funding is going to be calculated is going to stay the same. The only thing that's really changing is the way that the HAP portion of your HCV funds are calculated. And so we have some resources, and I would encourage you all just to review those, and we will talk about that here in just a second. But I also want to reiterate, as part of the language, there's language in the expansion that says that agencies are to gain no more or lose any funds as being a part of the expansion. So as you all are a part of the expansion, there is that provision that Congress had placed. So that's just something to take into consideration. And so that's why specifically our HCV housing, the HAP portion of the renewal formula takes that into account. So that's kind of the reason why it's a little bit different than it is for non-MTW agencies, but it is still largely based on expenses. So to kind of answer the previous question, it's not that you're going to be necessarily getting more funds as you are as an MTW agency, because we do have that statutory language that when the expansion was authorized back in the 2016 Appropriations Act, it specifically said that agencies that are going to be a part of the demonstration are to gain no more funds or lose any funding as a part of being part of the demonstration. So that's why formulas, kind of, it takes that into.
Yep, and I think Annalise, if you could pull up slide 30. Maybe it's the one before that, 29. There you go. So this talks a little bit about like implementing MTW funding flexibilities, that you can use your funds flexibly for any eligible purpose that's already eligible under Section 8 or 9, right? And that's under public housing or voucher. And then you can also use them, anything that needs waivers on top of what's already eligible is in the MTW, you can get approved through your MTW supplement. So an example is an agency could use their operating funds to issue more vouchers after the ACC amendment is executed. So I want to just open, so Adam, I wanted to circle back to your question, Adam, to make sure that we've addressed it. So the question was, you're an MTW agency, you did your ACC amendment, it's been countersigned by HUD. your funding will be, you won't be getting different funding. Your funding will be calculated based on your expenses. You might expend them on vouchers, you might expend them on another MTW eligible purpose, but your renewal calculation for next year will be calculated based on expenses. You won't necessarily see a difference in your funding from the month, 1 month to the next, other than you would get, it would be renewed based on, you know, whether you expend on MTW, on vouchers or on another MTW eligible purpose. Adam, does that answer your question?
It might. So we were
Okay.
under the understanding that if you had unused vouchers, that because you have unused vouchers, you would still receive the amount that you would have received had those been utilized, so that you could spend it on other purposes. In other words, to have fungibility, you would need to have the money coming in, right? So if we wanted to use Section 8 vouchers for, let's just make something up, a public housing purpose, we would need to have that funding coming in. So we have unused vouchers, and we were under the understanding that that means that with the unused vouchers, we would be receiving the funding that would have gone with those vouchers, but that hasn't happened yet. And we thought it was just perhaps a delay in the administration, since it's only been, you know, a little over a month.
Yeah. So when you use those, when you expend those unused vouchers on your public housing purpose, on the other purpose, it will then be considered expended. You would report those in BMS under MTW expense, under one of those new lines. And then at that point, you would be renewed based on those expenditures.
Thank you.
So the funds are being calculated in accordance with the expenditure, not like if you just have them unused and they're just sitting there not being expended, they wouldn't be included in that calculation.
Marianne, I'm wondering if it would be helpful to review how the HCV HAP funds are calculated for everyone.
Yeah. Do we have a slide on that?
We do, slide 32. Annalisa, could you please pull up slide 32? Okay, so I think, you know, let's just to reiterate, Praveen present on this back for all the landlords and cohort agencies, and also back for cohort 1 and cohort 2, or the staff tiered rents at MGW is the flexibility of this section. Just to remind you all, for your HAP portion of your HCV formula, it's going to be your renewal eligibility is based on the lower of this HAP renewal eligibility cap, which I know this slide looks really intimidating, but essentially that cap is your pre-MTW PUC inflated to the next year, and it's times your total number of eligible ACC authorized units. Or it's, so that's part one. And then the second part is based on expense. So the re-benchmark years, actual HIP and non-HAP eligible expenses. So those total eligible expenses are going to be equal to the total number of HAP expenses that you report into VMS during the course of the calendar year, plus any eligible non-HAP MTW expenses. So both of those things are calculated, and then, you know, during the renewal process, both of those things will be calculated, and then the lower of those will be what your renewal eligibility is based on. So this is just a really important point, because just to reiterate just once again, because this is very important to remember, this formula is directly related to the point I was making earlier about Congress stating when we were, when the expansion was authorized, saying that no MTW agency that was participating in the demonstration was going to receive no more funding or no less funding. So that's how this formula came into existence and why it is calculated this way. So I just, I want to encourage you all, kind of when we get to the end, we have some key resources, and in one of the links, there is a link to a recording of a webinar, I believe that was done in October of 2020 that goes into a lot more detail and actually has some actual examples of how these two things are calculated. So I would really, really encourage, if there's still some lingering questions, to review that, because I think this is, definitely, it can be a point of confusion. So I would definitely encourage you all to do that.
Adam, does that make sense?
It may. Again, we have a bunch of unused vouchers.
Yeah.
And the amount we received in April, when we did not have the funding flexibility, and the amount we received in May appeared to be the same. So I don't know what happens if we try to spend over the amount that HUD has given us.
So then once you expend those funds, and again, you'll check out that training that he talked about, and all of this is specified in section 4 of the MTW operations notice under finances or HCD calculation, I think it is. I forget what page. But you won't receive any additional funds for those unused vouchers until you use them, until you use that money. You can use that money on vouchers, or you can use that money on public housing purposes, but you won't be seeing them in the renewal. Like you won't be getting that funding, and they won't be included in the renewal until you've actually expended them.
Correct. And so I think part of the confusion here too is that you guys, it sounds like you guys executed your ACC after you received your renewal enclosure from FMD for this year. So your next year, this coming year for 2023, that'll be the year when you see how this renewal calculation for HAP comes into play. So I think that might be part of the disconnect here. So in 2023, for your calendar 2022 expenses, this will be your first year when this calculation that we're reviewing here comes into play. So the lower of that HAP renewal eligibility cap, which is again just per unit cost inflated times your number of ACC eligible units, or the lower of the actual year expenses. So when you expend these funds during the course of the year, that will definitely be taken into consideration as a part of this HAP renewal calculation process. So I think that might be part of the disconnect. Does that kind of address your question as well?
So I guess I sort of want to defer to my finance folks who are on the call.
Yeah.
Can we spend money that HUD doesn't say is there, with the understanding that there'll be more next month, I guess? But you're talking about next year, so certainly we don't want to wait a year to use our flexibility.
So if you have funds from vouchers that you have not used, and you spend them this year on vouchers or public housing or another MTW eligible purpose, when you get your renewal calculation in early 23, you will see that the benchmark that they used for 23 was based on all of those expenses up to that cap, up to the eligibility cap, right? So MTW agencies can't receive more funds than they otherwise would. So, that eligibility cap is basically assuming you're at 100% of ACC. So if you have those dollars and you have an eligible purpose and you spend them, you will be renewed on that.
Thank you.
Marianne, this is Joe Cardone. I'm with the Norwalk Housing Authority, and
Hey, Joe.
hi. Thank you again for all these seminars. They've been great. But yeah, I was under the impression too that we would get paid in advance, but obviously that's not the case. So okay. Okay.
So yeah, and that is exactly, and the reason for that is what Philip said, is that Congress in the 2016 Appropriations Act that authorized us to bring you all on, one of the things that they said was, but they can't receive more money. than they otherwise would. So we did not have the ability to do exactly what you're talking about here, which is to, fund you for units that are, or for funds that haven't been expended. And so, and working closely with our, friends in the finance and general counsel's offices and the voucher office, we developed this formula so that you can use your funds flexibly. You can use your HAP funds on public housing purposes, and you will be re-benchmarked based on the expenses up to that renewal eligibility cap. But you wouldn't be fronted the money. You wouldn't be receiving money for empty units. You're receiving the money for expended dollars.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Marianne, are you able to see the chat now? Has your computer cooperated, or would you like to continue to get flags about questions?
Oh, I can. Can you continue? Yes, I can, thanks. If HAP funding is used for administrative purposes, is that included in the calculation of HAP renewal? And I believe the answer to that is yes. Philip, is that right?
I think that is, I believe that is correct. And I believe in the part 1 webinar for the landlord incentives cohort in the slides, if you go to the HUD Exchange, we actually had a slide on that break down what the eligible funding sources are. So I would encourage everyone, if you have further questions about that, to go to the slides. I thought we had a slide in here that addressed that specifically, but I believe it was not included in this deck. So I don't have it directly to pull out, but definitely in the part 1 webinar that was conducted on March 3rd, I believe, in the slide deck for that's going to be on the HUD Exchange where all the expansion pages are. And we have that link in this deck to go there and really be able to pull that up and review that information.
Right.
For that breakdown.
Thanks, Philip.
What funding sources are.
Okay. Thanks, Philip. We have from Rachel, hi. Is there something about the date of the end of September 2022 in the context of renewal funding or reserves? Can you please explain that once again? So the September 22 date is the date by which HUD is supposed to announce all 100 new agencies. So in the context of contract renewal funding reserves, Philip, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think there's anything special about September 2022 in the context of renewal funding and or reserves. Is that correct, Philip?
Yes, but I think I know what Rachel is asking about.
Perfect.
What Rachel is alluding to is the use of previously appropriated funds. And I'm sorry if there's an echo. I hear it myself, so I apologize if you all are hearing feedback. But yeah, so just to reiterate that point, back in the second webinar, I believe that we did in later on in March, we talked about that we have a general provision in the Appropriations Act that allows expansion agencies to use their previously appropriated funds, aka reserves, for purposes that are different from what they originally were appropriated for. So that general provision was again included in the FY 2022 budget. And it does, because it is included in the budget does have an expiration date of September 2022. So in the previous webinar on March 20-something, I believe, I don't remember the exact date, but in that webinar, we had a slide that actually that had a link that would direct you to a web page that we keep you up to date on that status. So, Congress has been renewing that from year to year, but in the situation after September 30th, what we will do is we will keep that, we will update that web page after this year's after this fiscal year ends to update you all as to what the status of that is after that. So just to remind everyone, it is the agency's responsibility to do that. So please make sure you go back and bookmark that link, because we really do update it as we are able to, so that you
And
are
so if,
what's going on.
sorry. So just bottom line, when Congress passes and the president signs the next budget, that budget will tell us whether or not you continue to have the ability to use prior year's funds flexibly. We have a notice on our webpage that will let you know what Congress says. So that's kind of the bottom line. Thanks, Philip. I totally forgot about that. Okay, if we could go back to the Mentimeter for one more finance question in this section. Annalise, I think it's fine. It's the Mentimeter. Go back to menti.com, and we are going to question number 8. And the question is, virtually all obligation, expenditure, and requisitioning processes change under MTW. True or false? Virtually all obligation, expenditure, and requisitioning processes change under MTW. True or false? And the answer is false. The obligation, the expenditure activities remain the same. And in some cases, the requisitioning processes change. And Philip, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit here, but yeah. So, really the biggest change, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in the further section when we talk about reporting, is that there are going to be some changes to VMS and FTS reporting, but the timing of that for FTS will depend on when you decide to choose to implement funding flexibility. So I think when we get to that financial reporting section, Marianne, maybe we can that slide and just review that, because I think that is an important point to cover with everyone. And when we get there, I think we should review that with everybody.
All right, that sounds like a good plan. Any other questions before we get to like the reporting piece, slide 10? Any other questions relating to just finance policies, procedures? And it looks like somebody put in one of the link to that flex status page on our website, so thank you. All right. Key takeaways, Philip?
Okay. So these are the key takeaways from this section, and these are just really the important points that just really important things to keep in mind as you are moving forward. Obviously, this is not the last time you'll hear this information. If you have any additional questions, please always reach out to us via the inbox that's associated with your cohort. So anyway, so when we're talking about funding flexibility, just to review, we're talking about the use of both Section 9, which is going to be capital and operating funds, and your HCV funds for purposes they weren't originally appropriated for, or when using administrative flexibilities, which we talked about some in the context of special purpose vouchers. And we give you an example here. And so it's just important to remember that MTW funding flexibility does not extend to every single funding source or circumstance. And so both special purpose vouchers and the Section 8 project-based rental assistance program that's run by the Office of Multifamily Housing, those are two examples where you cannot use funding flexibility. Because for special purpose vouchers, those vouchers to be used. Am I hearing a ringing? Could somebody mute? So just to remind you all, special purpose vouchers need to be used for the purpose that they were originally appropriated for. So for example, HUD-VASH funds, you know, those funds associated with HUD-VASH vouchers need to be used to serve homeless veterans. Okay, so just as we were talking about with the Mentimeter questions, you know, obligation and expenditure requirements largely remain unchanged. There's a few requisitioning requirements for capital funds and HCV, but not for operating funds. Specifically for capital fund, it's the use of, with funding flexibility, there is a line item, I believe it's budget line item 1492, which is MTW. That is what you will be using in lieu of the, I believe it's 1406, it's the transfer to operations. You will no longer use that one. And then for HCV, we talked about this a lot when we, in the part 2 finance webinar, when we were talking about reporting, but there are some changes when you become an MTW agency in the context of the fields you'll be using and the timeline for that, which we'll talk about in the next section of this office hours presentation. And then finally, as we just talked about quite a bit, operating funds and capital funds, they're calculated the exact same way as you were when you were not an MTW agency. So those two funding sources will remain unchanged. It'll be the same process that those offices undergo to calculate your those funding sources. So that's a big takeaway. Administrative fees earned, it's the exact same way. Those are earned the exact same way as they currently are as when you are a non-MTW agency. The only thing that changes is, just one more time, I'm going to say this. For HAP, we're going to compare your actual HAP plus non-HAP eligible expenses with the HAP renewal eligibility cap, which is that calculation in the slide we just covered, which is your number of authorized and approved ACC units times the inflated per unit cost. So it's the lower of those two. So really key important takeaways. Next slide. Slide 13. Okay, so here's what I was talking about when we were discussing that slide where we were talking about how the HAP formula is calculated. I was mentioning that there was a link to a webinar where you could go and actually see how this is done. So that first link at the top here is that webinar. So when you click on that link, it'll direct you to the page where you can view the webinar. I would strongly encourage everyone to review this webinar if you still have questions or you actually want to kind of see how this is, like how some examples are done, because in that webinar, I believe we run through 1 or 2 examples. If not, section 6, subpart 5, subpart B of the operations notice does cover how it does reiterate in kind of more detail how the HAP funding formula is calculated, and it does for sure have an example that kind of goes through and shows you how that process plays out. And then finally, just to, because we want to promote these resources, they're great, they're helpful, they're great for reviewing as you're kind of going through it and implementing your program. We have 2 portions in the online training that we talked about in this section that are relevant here. So understanding and using funding flexibilities, and then operating MTW with other programs. So I would highly encourage you all to review those sections. It's some great supplementary information and may answer some other questions that you have. Now, I believe I'm going to turn it back to Marianne, and we're going to do the Mentimeter portion for financial reporting.
Sure. Before we do that, I just want to see if there's any questions on any of the key takeaways or resources that Philip just walked through. Okay. All right. Just a couple more Mentimeter questions until the break. So next, Mentimeter, menti.com. This question, number 9. Once the MTW ACC amendment is executed, reporting requirements for FDS, EPIC, and VMS change immediately. True or false? Again, once the ACC amendment is executed, reporting requirements for FDS, EPIC, and VMS change immediately. True or false? And the answer to that is false. Each system has its own trigger as to what when that happens. So it is not the same for all of them. Next question. And if you want us to walk through each of those, let us know. We can do that. Next question, number 10, MTW FDS reporting doesn't begin in the fiscal year the ACC amendment is executed if the agency doesn't begin implementing funding flexibility in that year. I'm going to say that again because that was a mouthful. MTW FDS reporting does not begin in the fiscal year the MTW ACC amendment is executed if the agency does not begin implementing the funding flexibility that year. True or false? And the answer to that is true. FDS reporting requirements hinge on when you start using your funding flexibly. That said, you will all need to transition it during your first full year as an MTW agency. Next question. And I have, Jana, I've once again lost eyes, so I'm going to keep on walking through these, but I can't see the chat. I don't know what's going on with my computer today. Next question, number 11. For capital fund reporting, you will use a new BLI if you use capital funds for non-capital fund purpose. True or false? For MTW capital fund reporting, you will use a new BLI if you use the MTW funds for non-capital fund purposes. And the answer to that is true. And Philip gave it away. As we were talking earlier, if you are using capital fund funding for traditional capital fund eligible activities, you report it in the traditional capital fund BLIs. But if you want to use your MTW funds for any other non-capital purpose, such as op or admin or vouchers, then that's when you use the BLI 1492, which is specifically for MTW. And then last question in this group, number 12, for VMS, the first time you will submit a report using the MTW fields will be the second month after the execution of the ACC amendment. True or false? So the first time that you actually submit a report using the MTW fields will be the second month after the execution of the ACC amendment. And the answer to that is kind of a tricky one too. True, because the reporting lags a month. VMS reporting does not start immediately after the ACC amendment execution. And Philip, I'm going to ask you to explain that one a little bit for us, please.
Yeah, so actually, this kind of relates to the timing triggering in the slide we have. So Marion, would you like to cover this thoroughly after the break or before the break? The triggers and what triggers what with the ACC amendment and financial.
I say let's go for it. Let's go for it now. Let's see if we can address get the finance stuff done, and then we can move on to the supplement after the break.
So, ICF, please load slide. Let's see. Oh gosh, slide 33. Slide 33. Okay, so this is another important point that we get a lot of questions on, and this relates to how the ACC amendment affects just financial reporting in general, and these are the kind of the processes. So we'll sort of really quickly cover each one of these points and and thorough here so that it's very clear to everyone. So the first one we're going to discuss is the FDS, or the financial data schedule. So the trigger for change in the first year as an MTW agency is whether or not you begin to use funding flexibility or not. So let's say you execute your ACC amendment on May 20th, your first day as an MTW agency is June 1st. So for the remainder of your fiscal year, if you decided not to implement funding flexibility, you will not need to do reporting. You will not need to follow those MTW specific reporting instructions, which are available at a link in the as a resource in the March slides. You will not need to follow those. However, if you do decide to, in that fiscal year, the remainder of that fiscal year, choose to implement funding flexibility, then you will need to follow those special reporting instructions that are linked in the March webinar. However, so that's kind of the process after you execute your ACC amendment. Your first full fiscal year as an MTW PHA, so following after your first fiscal year agency is complete, that next year, where the first year where you are completely, the whole year, you're an MTW agency, then you will need to follow the MTW reporting instructions. So first year, the initial year, the remainder of the year, it depends on whether or not you implement funding flexibility. If you do during the course of that year, those reporting instructions kick in. If you don't, you can report as you have been doing as a non-MTW agency for the rest of that first year. The next year, the first complete year when you're an MTW agency, that's when you will definitely need to start using those MTW reporting instructions. Okay.
Yep.
It's a little bit of a.
And this is all laid out in trainings that you showed us, right? In this.
Correct.
Right.
So that's in the March reporting, the March 20th reporting webinar. Capital funding. So the trigger for change here is the ACC amendment execution. And so the thing that's really different here, as we talked about, is for the use of capital funds for non-capital fund purposes. There is a budget line item called 1492, and that's the one you use. And so you won't be using the budget line 1406, which I believe is called transfer to operations. So you will cease using that. And for VMS specifically, because I see there was a question in here in the chat about what triggers VMS reporting. So the trigger of that for the change is actually your ACC amendment execution. So going back to our previous example, May 20th was the date that HUD countersigned the ACC amendment. June 1st is your first month as an MTW PHA. So in June, you will still, in June, the calendar for June 2022, you would do your reporting as a non-MTW agency because it's going to be for May 2022. The following month, July of 2022, you're going to be reporting in June, which is your first complete month as an MTW agency. At that point, you will then need to use the MTW fields. And so that's sort of the trigger for change there. And that's sort of why that Mentimeter is the second month after, because VMS is always, for that current month that you're doing, it's always for reporting previous month's expenses, right? Because that's, the purpose of that system. So, and now I'm going to Mary Ann to see if there's been any questions.
Thank you, Philip. I lost my chat for a minute there. So Janet, if there's anything in the chat, I can't see it. But I do want to open it back up to see. We just talked about a lot of finance stuff, to see if there's any questions for Philip or us now.
Right now, Philip answered the only question that's showing up in the chat, but we can wait for a moment to see if anything else appears. I'll let you know.
Great, thanks, Janet. Okay. I'm going to take silence as, whew, that was a lot. And I think I'm going to say, let's take a 10-minute break, stretch, drink your water, grab some food, run around the block. And then if you as you are gone, if you come up with any additional questions or thoughts or something didn't seem quite right, just feel free. We'll come back to questions again here on the finance side, see if there's anything else that comes up while we're on break. But let's go give our brains a little bit of a break and let's come back here. It is now 2:56 Eastern. Let's start back up again here at 3:06 Eastern. So thanks, everybody. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody enjoyed your break, got the caffeine, got the water, and I just want to just hold here a minute to see if there's any other questions or thoughts that you may have had while you were on break, specifically relating to finance. How are y'all doing? You here? Thumbs up? Yeah. There.
Marianne,
Okay, so we are going to move on to the next section, which is the Mtw Supplement. So similar to what we did before, we are going to ask some questions, maybe stop and talk about it if there's questions, if it makes sense, and then see what questions you guys have as well. So if you could pull out your handy, oh my gosh, you know what? Can you hear me better? Okay. If you pull out your handy dandy Mentimeter, Menti.com, number 13, question is, once you have carefully planned out your MTW activities, it doesn't take much thought to write the Mtw supplement. Again, once you've carefully planned out your MTW activities, it doesn't take much thought to write the Mtw supplement. True or false? Good job. Over 90% of this got it right when you said false. In your supplement, you want to write a clear description of what will be communicated so that your public and HUD understand. And this really takes some thought and time and attention. It's not hard, but it does take care and it does take some thought. Thanks, Anna. Sorry about that. I'll try to be a little bit more neutral the next time. Next question, number 14. Is it okay to post only the Mtw supplement narrative to start the public comment period and then add the impact analysis and hardship policies before the public hearing? Yes or no? Is it okay to post only the Mtw supplement narrative to start the public comment period and then add the impact analysis and hardship policy before the public hearing? Yes or no? And in this one, the answer is no, and I think I was pretty neutral, and most of you still got that right. While it might be tempting to speed things up by waiting, just posting the narrative to get it started and waiting to post the impact analysis and hardship policies later, the public needs the chance to review and weigh in on all of it and to have a complete Mtw supplement to be able to review. So the answer to this question is no, it is not okay to only submit the narrative part of the supplement to get the comment period started.
Hey, Marianne, this might also be a good time to double back on that other question about the overall public process. We were able to come up with an answer on that. So it was
yes, Allison, what'd you find?
Yes, and what to do. So a supplement goes through the regular public process you all should be used to with your PHA plan. So it's the same public process. If you want to brush up on that, it's 24 CFR 903.17. So the public process requires that you have all the documents together to undergo the 45-day public process. And then after that, you take the comments and use that to inform any changes to your documents. And then you submit after that. So should be a process that you all are familiar with from the PHA plan. And again, the citation is 24 CFR 903.17 if you need to take a look for a refresher on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. That was perfect. Any questions on that?
Allison and Marianne, this is Jenny. Can I add just one more point to what you're saying? Because the other piece is just as you're preparing the supplement is if you are looking at proposing a safe harbor waiver or an agency specific waiver as part of your supplement, that requires a second public hearing. So just to make sure that you keep, it's a little confusing, or it can be confusing, just to keep these all straight. But I've received some questions in the mailbox about that. If it can be the same public hearing process, well, the process could maybe run simultaneously, but you actually do have to actually hold a separate public meeting in regards to those safe harbor, potentially, and agency specific waivers. And then the other part of the question was whether or not if you could immediately after that public hearing go to your board with what you had completed the process at that point. But again, there is information that's stated in the MTW operations notice that you need to show the comments that you received and what was after you had considered them, reviewed them and considered them, what was your response? So that is something that would be wrapped into part of what you submit with your supplement to really satisfy the directions in the moving to work operations notice. So that is easy to find. It begins page 8 of the section 6 link, where you can print that out in the reader friendly version from the moving to work website. But anyway, thanks. I was just going to add those two things. So
great. Thanks, Jenny and Allison, and this is based on what they've seen already from those cohort 1 and 2 agencies that have submitted into the system.
And Marianne, there's a question that I think might be helpful to look at right now, Allison. If you may see it in the chat, but Catherine is asking if we should put the supplement through the online program and then publish it for this public comment, or whether it's okay to use the Word draft that everybody's been suggested to make.
Right, so you can use just whatever is most user-friendly for your community. So the point is to get your community feedback. They don't have access to the online system. So, whatever format in paper or digitally will work for your community, but they should be able to access that information. So it's not necessary that it be in Salesforce because they don't have that information. I don't know if you have anything to add, Lynn.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for the Word version we talked about before is more for drafting some of the responses for copying and pasting into the web-based system in the housing information portal. And so what a lot of PHAs have done is go ahead and start a draft in the system and then generate the PDF file, and they have their other files that, like impact analysis or anything like that they would need to attach. And, that gives them, that generated PDF gives them, a format. But, as Allison said, you can use another format as long as you ensure that all the information is there. It's just a lot of times people like to use the online system to make sure, all the sections of the supplement are there.
Wendell, and I'll just note for you that Catherine, who asked the original question, says that's exactly what she was wondering, if there is a generated PDF format. So you hit it on the head.
Yeah, and just for everybody's awareness, in the job aid that's for how to use the system that's on the Mtw Supplement webpage, which I'll put a link for in the chat, in that job aid, there's actually a section with instructions for how to generate that PDF file once you've filled in the web-based form. And as a bonus, I would just say, make sure when you get to section J that you use your eyes really good and don't accidentally hit submit because you're so used to hitting buttons that say next. So that's one bonus I'll give, but I'll put the link to the webpage in the chat as well.
Thank you, Gwendolyn and Allison. And again, voice from experience there, from what we've seen from the cohort 1 and 2 agencies. So good tips. Any questions for Allison or Gwendolyn from what they just described?
Nothing in the chat, Marianne.
All right, thank you. Next question, 15. MTW agencies need to flesh out their hardship policies associated with MTW waivers. The MTW operations notice does not provide sufficient detail. Again, this is based on what we've seen. The agencies need to flesh out the hardship policies associated with the waivers. The operations notice does not provide sufficient detail. True or false? And Jenny, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to expound here. Or Allison, I'm not sure. Look at that. Oh, wait, I can't, my glasses. So the correct answer is true, that when a hardship policies are required, that you need to flesh it out more. You can't just refer back to the operations notice. Allison, do you want to kind of give a little bit of detail here?
Sure. So what's in the operations notice are the types of situations that you would need to address through your hardship policy. So you should take care to address those necessary factors and apply them to the activities you have that require a hardship policy. But you can't just copy and paste them from the operations notice. They need to be applied to the specific activities that are requiring a hardship policy. In addition to that, those, what's in the operations notice is the minimum that you must consider that's required, but you want to think carefully about the activities and what hardships may arise, and come up with any situations that might be unique to your community that you want to address through a hardship policy as well.
Great. Thanks, Allison. Jenny, anything to add or any questions for Allison? We got another question here.
I'll just quickly say that no, I think that's a good explanation. I think the operations notice calls out the things that you should consider, but always keep in mind your local community and what the tenants and residents in your program, how they might be viewing it and seeing it, and just how it will work for them. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So there's an outstanding question in the chat that I want everybody to pay attention to. I'm going to ask the question, and Allison, I'm going to send it to you. Let's say we don't need any waivers at this time, but we find that the initiatives that we're doing aren't giving us the outcome that we were hoping for. Can we request new waivers at a later date? Allison.
Yes, that is a great question. So,
yeah.
There's a number of years, I believe, Marianne, it's 20 years on the contracts, right?
20 years.
So you have 20 years to, as of now, to implement all the waivers and activities in the MTW operations notice. So we actually recommend that agencies take their time getting, their feet wet with MTW. There's a lot of, different ways of thinking and different systems and reporting and processes that you'll need to learn. So we do really recommend that agencies think very carefully about the waivers and activities that they're proposing right off the bat. And, you know, MTW is a demonstration, so you're always able to, you know, we encourage you to be looking at those outcomes of the waivers and activities you do propose. And if one is not working as you expect, then you're able to, you know, stop doing that waiver or activity or change it up a little bit, or, you know, request approval for different waivers and activities. So, you know, it's a work in progress, and you're always able to go back to that operations notice and look at different strategies, or, you know, come up with your own through the agency specific or safe harbor waiver process.
Awesome. Bottom line, you do not have to do everything all at once. You do not need to request the ability to do everything all at once. Only request the ability to do what you want to do this coming year. And then next year, you'll go see if you want to add more. Awesome. Great question. Other questions on this piece on kind of the supplement or the hardship policy? Okay, so then the next question, 16, not done with Mentee yet. Public engagement is an essential element to the MTW process. True or false? I expect 100% accuracy here. Public engagement is an essential element of the MTW process. Yes, 100% accuracy. Public engagement, most importantly, to the families you serve. Start with your staff, your board, your legal advocacy groups, all of the different groups. So wonderful, good job. Anybody want to share their public engagement experience with either tips and tricks that might help your peers, or something that happened that was a pitfall that you want to maybe watch out for? Anybody want to share? I know you're there. Okay. Maybe not. Maybe next time. All right. Next question, number 17. When can an MTW agency begin actually implementing the activities that require HUD approval? Is it the day after signing the MTW ACC agreement? Amendment, I'm sorry. Is it the first month following the MTW ACC amendment and execution by HUD? Or is it the day the supplement to the plan is approved and the ACOP and admin plan is updated? Again, is it the day that you sign the ACC amendment? Is it the first of the month following HUD's execution of the ACC amendment? Or is it once the supplement has been approved by HUD and the ACOP and admin plan has been updated? So 73% of you got this right. It is once you've updated your ACOP and admin plan. As with always, you always need to update your ACOP and admin plan. Allison or Jenny, is there anything else you want to say about that?
I think that's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Marianne, the other thing that I think about with this question in particular is the certification of compliance. And with that, you are adding the date of when you are seeing this be effective. And that should be, you know, the start. I mean, what most agencies have put in is the start of their next fiscal year. So that is another thing that can guide you, you being agencies, as you're proposing and putting that when you want to implement. But educating staff is huge with that, so that they understand too that it doesn't mean the day after your ACC is signed.
Mm-hmm. Right. So not only to engage with the staff, but to make sure they understand when they can start doing it. That's great. Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah.
I think that's all of our questions for you. I just want to pause here for a moment to see if there's, you know, the supplement's a big deal. For those of you from one of the first couple cohorts, I don't know, you may have some tips and tricks on the supplement and how it's gone. Any other questions from you all, or anybody want to kind of share kind of your experience with the supplement that your peers may benefit from?
Hi, this is Lindsay at Akron. Excuse me, one thing with the online supplement that I didn't realize when I went to generate the PDF. So we did do the online form before our public process. And then I wanted to download the PDF to share on our website and in other locations. And the PDF does take a few minutes to generate. So more than once, I thought that it didn't save half of my information and got nervous about that all the work I had done was gone. I did do it all in a Word document as well, as I know Wendolyn suggested earlier, and kind of copy and pasted into the online supplement, but it does take a few minutes. And the PDF version it creates really is nice. We got compliments on it during our public process period that it was pretty easy to follow. We did a lot of narratives in there, and we found it really useful.
That's awesome. Great tips, and thanks for the feedback. That's really good to know. Thanks, Lindsay. Others?
Marianne, this is Jenny.
Yep.
Can I also compliment Lindsay from having worked with her and reviewing
Yes,
her,
of course.
her supplement submission on behalf of her agency? But they did an excellent job of putting all the pieces together. So, and I have learned that same thing about being patient, because I clearly have not been. And Wendolyn has had to remind me multiple times to, Jen, slow down. Because I would send messages to her saying, it's not there, I don't know what happened. But, when I'm patient and I wait, it's all there. But Lindsay and her team took the extra step to download that PDF, which is, according to the operations notice, but then all the additional material, like the impact analysis and the hardship policy, and, all of those other documents she took and did, creating one PDF file that enclosed and incorporated all of those. And the other key piece was they created a table of contents. So it was all one document. It was incredibly easy to read and understand, and it was really easy to follow and find information. So if I was a person, either a resident or a tenant or just a person in their community, I could easily look at that and go looking specifically, like, I want to know what the hardship policy is. I knew where I needed to go and what page that was on. So it made it a really good communication tool for people to know it and understand. Yeah. So, I mean, kudos to them. Yeah.
And can you remember, Lindsay, you're with Akron?
Yes.
Is that right?
Thank you, Jenny. Yes.
So if I could put a plug, all of our approved supplements, I believe, and Wendolyn will correct me if I'm wrong here, are on our website. So if you go to the MTW participating sites page of the MTW website, you'll see every agency's supplement and what they're doing, what's been approved. And so to see what Jenny is talking about here, you can go check out Akron's approved supplement.
Akron's is not there yet because I haven't gotten it from Jenny yet, but
all right.
But you're right.
So it'll be
but
there.
A good plug for the website. Yeah, a good plug for the website. That as soon as I get it, then it'll be up on the website.
Yeah.
And one thing I do want to mention too, about her comment is, we've tried to put little tips like that about I've done everything but say like you did earlier, Marianne. Okay, go get a drink of water and then come back and look for some, like the PDF, which Jenny will probably laugh because I think I did tell her that. But yeah, I've done everything but that in the job aid. So where there are tips like that can be followed. Just that's where the job aids have done really good. And I'll say this too, that job aid has probably gotten at least one update a month, because as we get feedback from y'all about the system, you send questions in or whatever, if something needs to be tweaked like that, I do go ahead and update the job aid. So, definitely, hopefully it's a good resource that fellow agencies have also indirectly contributed to.
Awesome. Thank you, Wendell. And good reminder, and also good plug to keep that job aid link and on your computer, and to go check that out as you're getting ready to submit. Allison, there's a great question in here for you. Is there an estimated time frame for HUD to approve the MTW supplement to the PHA plan once it's approved?
Sure. So the MTW supplement is a supplement to the PHA plan, and there are review timelines associated with PHA plans. So HUD has to approve or disapprove the plan within 75 days. So you can expect that timeline to be used for the supplement, since it's a part of the PHA plan. Your field office and our program office will work to get you any comments on your documents, hopefully far in advance of that 75 days, and we'll work with you on making any necessary edits so that that 75-day deadline can be met. The one caveat is that for the agency-specific waivers and the safe harbor waivers, those are sort of on a different track than just the general activities and waivers that you'll be invoking through the MTW operations notice. So those can sometimes take longer. So it could be the case where your overall MTW supplement is approved within those 75 days, but you have some agency-specific waivers that are taking slightly longer than that to go through the approval process. So you will receive a specific letter from HUD for approval on those agency-specific or safe harbor waivers.
That is a good reminder. Thank you, Allison. Any other questions for Allison or Jenny or Wendell as it relates to the supplement? There are other tips and tricks. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, and Allison, if you could do key takeaways from this section.
Sure. Great. So this is just some key takeaways on putting together your MTW supplement. As Marianne said, this is the important document that's going to guide your activities and what you're doing through your MTW flexibility. So the first point that we want to make is that your MTW supplement should really summarize what you'll be doing in a way that makes your plans clear to the public. So again, this document is one that's put through a public process that anyone in your community, any stakeholder, should be able to pick up and have a reasonably clear idea of what it is you're doing through MTW. So we really encourage use of those description boxes, not just filling out all the radio buttons, but using those description boxes to say specifically what you're doing and to provide some explanation on those activities and the specific details of those activities. As you prepare to complete your supplement, keep in mind you'll need to develop impact analyses, hardship policies as they apply to the specific activities that you are proposing. So keep in mind to look at those safe harbors, and in the safe harbor you'll see whether a hardship policy and or an impact analysis is needed associated with that activity. So just keep that kind of written down and make sure that you're submitting those documents when they're required. And just a reminder that it is it's the option of the PHA whether you submit a separate impact analysis and hardship policy for each activity, or if you want to have a more cohesive impact analysis and hardship policies that incorporate groups of activities. So that's up to the agency. And then the other thing you're going to want to make sure you include is a documentation of the public process. So as Jenny was talking about a little bit earlier, the MTW supplement requires that you provide a summary of the public comments and the agency's responses, and also that certifications of compliance document. And the date on the top of that document should be the first day of the fiscal year that is associated with the plan that you're submitting. So if you're in FY23 July 1 agency, then the date at the top of that will be July 1st, 2022. So that'll be the first day of the fiscal year for which you're covering. And then another kind of, stop sign here that we keep saying is to plan ahead. Remember that the MTW supplement development process can take quite some time. And especially this first time around, we recommend that agencies are really intentional in the activities that they're proposing. We can't say this enough. We really encourage you to not, try and get every activity and waiver in this first version. It's best to kind of start slow and to get your feet under you before you get running with everything in the operations notice. So just take time, plan ahead, and don't feel like you need to propose the whole kit and caboodle of the operations notice. Make sure you're being realistic about what your agency is able to do in your first year of MTW. And then another tip here is do not dive right into the online supplement form. We recommend that you use the OMB approved form. It's the HUD 50075 MTW supplement to the annual PHA plan. So you'll find that on the MTW webpage, and it's just a form that you can fill out, the good old fashioned paper version, to get some of that information in there and to prepare your content before you're in the system starting your online submission. So that's the recommended path forward there. Also, another tip is to make sure you plan carefully. So you want to look at the implementation date that you're targeting, and then back up all the steps you need to hit that implementation date from there. So keeping in mind that there's a lot of things that have to be accomplished. The ACC signature and counter signature, the supplement submission and review and approval, and then also those updates to your admin and ACOP, those take time as well. So make sure you're considering all of the things that need to get done before actual implementation when you're planning the start date for your activities. And then a last tip here, we did do some trainings that are recorded and posted on the HUD Exchange that we'd like to highlight for some of the other agencies that are not in the landlord incentives cohort. So we did a section in this last round of training on tips for writing a strong MTW supplement narrative. So that was what I was describing, those descriptive sections of your MTW supplement. So some tips and tricks for providing complete and cohesive information in those descriptive boxes. So we encourage, the landlord incentives cohort PHAs, if you want to look at it again, or some of those earlier PHAs, it might be new information that you haven't seen before. Check out that training, and we'll go, oh, they've already moved to the next slide here. So you'll see it's that last bullet on the key resources page, those tips for success for writing a strong MTW supplement narrative. So, and with that, you can see the other key resources that are available on the MTW supplement. There are a lot of them. It's a very big document. So you'll find a lot of resources here that will help you along your way. I won't read them all here, but know that they are available for you, and there should be lots of help depending on what your specific questions may be. So I'll pass it back to Mary Ann.
Awesome, Allison, thank you so much. And yeah, a lot of really good resources out there for all of you as you're putting together your supplements. And with that, I would like to take another moment to pause and see if there are any questions or comments. We're kind of getting ready to wrap up here. So before we say goodbye, I want to just open it up for questions one more time.
Mary Ann, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. In one of the things that Allison just mentioned about the ACOP and the admin plans, but a question has come in multiple times about when should agencies update those documents? Should that wait till after the supplement has been approved and then work on it? And I mean, that is up to the PHA, but in practice, one of the things that I found helpful was that I had a working copy that I was working on with the expectation that everything as proposed in the supplement that I submitted, that those would be approved. And so once those were approved, there would be changes, absolutely, that would have to be made. So with that assumption, I was editing and making those changes so that once the approval happened, or if there were questions and modifications made, that it was a working document, but that it was ready for posting. And, you know, that update was ready to go once approval was made. So it didn't have to be one thing first and then the next thing. It was like it could be happening even though it wasn't live, but it was a proactive step so that we could move quickly once the approval had come through. So that was a way to think about it and address it just in practice, if that's helpful to anyone else.
Thanks, Jenny. And it's helpful coming from the voice of someone that's been there. So thank you very much. Got a thumbs up from Vicki. Thank you. Any other questions? Anything else on the finance piece that we talked about earlier, the ACC amendment or public process? Oh, good. Got a question for you, Philip. Oh, it's a long one. Hang on a second. Okay, so I'm going to read the question, but Subra, I might need you also to come up. It might be easier if you just come off mute and ask your question verbally, and then I'll turn it to you, Philip. No? Okay.
So my question was, I believe the special purpose vouchers were included in the supplement. I don't quite understand. I'm a finance guy, so it was included in the waivers or in the supplement to be considered as MTW. But if it doesn't get approved by the fiscal year end, I was told by our auditors that it needs to be reported separately. You know, one as a MTW and one as a HCV. But my question is, the funding for, you know, MTW for HCV is all combined. So how do we determine the funding for the special purpose voucher?
Great. Thank you for the question. I believe we may have done a FAQ or insider on this, but Philip, can you speak to this?
I'm sorry. So is your question about how SPV funding is determined, or could you repeat the question one more time? So I'm what it is.
See, the special purpose vouchers, the funding, you know, over the years, they got combined into the HCV funding. They are not really separated. So if the special purpose voucher doesn't get included in the MTW, then my auditor was mentioning that I have to report it at the year end as a separate program. You know, one is MTW and one is a HCV program. So the revenues, I can track the HAP expenses for the special purpose vouchers, but the revenues, how do I determine what portion of the revenues belongs to special purpose vouchers?
I think we might need some additional follow-up on this question.
Okay.
I'm going to take your question from the chat and we will get back to you.
Okay.
Because
okay, and it also kind of creates a problem because then you would have two different, you know, restricted net assets, and because you are treating them as two separate programs.
And actually, what I'm going to ask you to do is actually, can you, are you a part of the Landlord Incentives cohort, or are you a part of another cohort?
We're a small agency. I don't know.
Yeah, so how about this? I will drop my email in the chat and just email me your question directly, like what you were just saying over the phone, because it's a little bit different than what's in the chat, and then we will get back to you as soon as we can.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Philip, for that, and thank you for the question. Other questions, thoughts reactions?
And something that might be helpful, it may not answer the question specifically, but I know that there is a policy guidance FAQ document on the Moving to Work website around special purpose vouchers. So like VASH or like foster youth or emergency housing vouchers, you know, those, and it talks about what needs to happen in regards to moving to work with those special purpose vouchers. So that might be a good starting point to take a look at that. So anyway, because there's a different approval process for using moving to work flexibilities, both in the policy and I think in many cases, I'm going to say this with I'm going to acknowledge that I am not a finance person, but that the funds for those vouchers cannot be mixed in with moving to work funding.
Right, right. That's right. And you know, to that effect, as Jenny was mentioning, the SPV FAQ, oh, it's a mouthful, really does go through and explain very clearly for each voucher type, those questions around administrative flexibilities, which we alluded to. I would also, just to piggyback off of what Jenny was saying, if you have questions about SPVs and reporting in general, we did a webinar in November 2021 that really goes into a lot of information and covers some of that material from the SPV FAQ. I will link the link to the webinars, the previous recordings in the chat. But yeah, we will take your question and we will get back to you as soon as we can.
Great. Thanks, Philip. And I saw somebody else in here said that they were interested in the answer as well and dropped their name in as well.
Okay.
Another question for Allison, I think. Will there be a problem with changing the implementation date, considering we need to make changes to the admin plan, train, et cetera, et cetera?
So no, so you should consider that when planning your implementation date. So hopefully when you put your implementation date in your supplement, you're doing as we have explained here and incorporating the time that it takes to update your admin plan and train and do all of those things. If there's an unforeseen circumstances where those, one step in that takes longer than you might have anticipated, that's okay. We understand that things do happen, and you would just report any updates in the next supplement that you submit. But you should take care to plan for those things when you're coming up with your implementation date.
Perfect. Thanks, Allison. And Philip, I'm seeing another person that wants that, so it might be actually best if we provide the answer to that question through an insider. So Super, if you could email the question to Philip as you had described it when talking, and then maybe we can put together an insider or something so that everybody has the same answer. Okay, I don't see any other questions, comments. Next slide, please. So this is just another, more, lots and lots of resources for you, right? So there's specific references to the MTW operations notice, the MTW page, the expansion page, the various training pages, the online manual. I don't think we necessarily plug that enough. We spent a lot of time almost like converting the operations notice into this online manual to make it really clear, kind of walk through, make it make sense. There's a whole section here on the hardship policies, the impact analysis. There's various interactive training. There's information on the HUD exchange, the webinar, a couple webinars, the system guidance. We talked about the kind of getting started, the resources, the job aid. The Mtw Supplement job aid is so important. I would want to bold star that one. We have the known issues. There's a lot of, we're still working with the developing team. We're making real-time changes as we hear from you. So make sure to pay attention to that known issues, use pay information, how to access requests to the supplement system. And again, there's a ton of good information on the Mtw supplement relating to the reference guide, the ops notice. Always start with the ops notice, the waivers, et cetera. So just there's a lot of information, but there's a lot of resources to help you. And so we try to keep our website clean and updated and clear. But if there's ever any questions that you have, start with your field office, and they'll bring us in as necessary as well. But we are, want to make sure that we can address any questions that you have. And in an instance like this, if there's a question that keeps on coming up from multiple folks, we can, send out an answer to everybody, or maybe we can hop on another webinar as it makes sense for you guys. And so with that, any other questions? Pause. Stop. So with that, we are going to say thank you for coming today. High fives right back to you, Vicki, and to all of you. This is such a big deal, and we're so excited that you're here. And we thank you so much for joining us for today, joining the Mtw program. And please let us know at any point if you have any questions whatsoever. We're here for you, and we will we will be in touch. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.